based on the IPCC.
Welcome to Global Questions with me, Zainab Badawi, from Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo. I'm on one of the city's beautiful waterfronts along the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka's stunning coastline makes it popular with visitors, but this country, like many others in the region, suffers from extreme weather conditions. Heat waves followed by torrential rain and rising sea levels. So we're asking if Sri Lanka is something of a test case of what and what not to do in combating environmental challenges. And will the historic COP27 agreement to help developing nations be enough to avert climate catastrophe? That's Global Questions, Sri Lanka, surviving climate change. Welcome to the magnificent National Museum here in Colombo, which charts the history of this beautiful tropical island as it marks 75 years of independence from Britain. I've got a panel from here in Sri Lanka who are going to be answering questions from my audience here. Let me tell you who's in the hot seat for this edition of Global Questions. Ruwan Wijewardena is Deputy Leader of the United National Party and is the President's right-hand advisor on climate change. He recently launched a climate prosperity plan to tackle the crippling effects of the climate crisis. Professor Mohan Munasinghe is an eminent Sri Lankan climate scientist. He was vice chair of the UN International Panel on Climate Change when, as an institution, it was awarded the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore for efforts to combat climate change. And Hemantha Wittanayake is chair of Friends of the Earth International. He co-founded the Center for Environmental Justice, one of the most visible environmental organizations here in Sri Lanka. That's our panel. Welcome to you all. And don't forget, you too can join the conversation. It's hashtag BBC Global Questions. Let's go to our first question now, and it is from Amanda Halliday. Amanda, your question, please.
Is Sri Lanka preparing for the eventual shift away from the use of fossil fuels? And if so, how?
Ruwan, so let's start with you. I think the figures are something like 40% is clean energy and 60% of energy is pretty dirty. It comes from coal and oil.
Absolutely.
Sorry to put it so bluntly.
Yes, we are actually. So we have pledged that we will lessen our dependency on fossil fuel, and we would reach 70% of our energy production from renewable energy by 2030. So this is pretty much right up in our agenda, and there are a lot of projects that we are hoping to start, and some of it to start this year. One project in particular is the Sri Lanka offshore wind array project, which we are hoping will, I think it will produce about 5 gigawatts of power, which is way more than what we need. But what we are hoping to do is actually start exporting electricity as well through that project. And it's most probably going to, I think it's a region of $16 billion of investments on this. So there are various projects like this, and we actually put forward our country prosperity plan in the COP27. That was the President Wickremesinghe himself put forward the prosperity plan. And in the prosperity plan, we have so many projects that are from renewable energy to agriculture to irrigation, everything. It's pretty much like a green pathway to the economic recovery of this island.
All right, so the answer is yes, Sri Lanka is preparing.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, Hemantha, do you agree with that?
Actually, if you really want to respect to the global climate targets, based on the IPCC reports, and we have to go by zero emission by 2050. So if you want to do that by 2040, you have to definitely remove all the coal power plants which G20 countries already agreed. and then the transport sector. It's not only the energy, electricity, but the transport sector. I think we are very much behind these targets at the moment. One of the reasons is that although there was a huge advocacy from the civil society and the Ceylon Electricity Board to change their long-term generation plan to bring more and more renewable energy, that did not happen because they are on coal bias. So I think that's one of the problems. Still, now we are slowly moving into the wind and solar power, but I think we need rapid investment in these sectors if we want to really
but you're not
go
going to get that rapid investment given the economic crisis here in the country when
exactly.
people are struggling to put food on the table, right? So he's not giving the government a very good scorecard there. Okay, Professor Munasinghe, how would you answer this question?
I'll pick up on your last point. I think we are going through a severe economic crisis. So I agree with the ambitious long-term plans that the minister has set out, and globally with the 2050 target for net zero carbon. But that doesn't mean that each and every country can achieve that target, because especially if you're poor and you're trying to raise your the poor population out of poverty, you need some headroom for growth.
Let's go to our next question. It's from Natasha Mamuhua. Natasha.
Good evening. A loss and damage funding mechanism is critical for the global south, but especially for vulnerable 20 countries, of which Sri Lanka is a member of. How can we ensure accountability that the funds received by governments will contribute to achieving climate justice?
All right, Samantha, I should just remind people that the loss and damage was that historic agreement taken at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh by richer nations to try to give money to developing countries to help them recover from the damage and the economic losses of climate change. But your answer to that question about accountability for such funds, if they come?
In my opinion, all the developing countries have been asking this loss and damage fund for more than 15 years. And it's a great thing that we got that loss and damage fund in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. But unfortunately, there's no money, and it will take another 4 or 5 years to bring the procedures, guidelines, and then the developed countries to put money. And of course, although in Copenhagen, the countries, developed countries agreed to put 100 billion US dollars annually, that money didn't come. Still, the Green Climate Fund is only having 11.9 billion. So adaptation fund 998 million by now. So there's no money coming from the developed countries. Even if we are planning to get some money from the loss and damage money, it's not going to come sooner. So, but this is something very, very urgent.
All right. I mean, there's going to be a lot of competition for limited funds. So basically, what Hemantha's saying, Professor Munasinghe, is talking about accountability of these funds if they came to Sri Lanka is a bit of an academic question because you don't think there's much money that's going to be coming. But there is this issue of climate justice at the core of that question, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Let me just set this in context. The IPCC, the Nobel Peace Prize was mentioned. One of the reasons why we received that prize was because we made the connection between sustainable development and climate change. And one of the key points that we have made is that most of the emissions, historic emissions that have occurred, were put there by the wealthier countries, basically the Western countries, whereas the impacts of climate change will be felt mainly in the developing world. So there's a clear issue of climate fairness or justice. And if you look at the numbers, basically one could argue that there is a greenhouse gas debt that the Western countries have exceeded their share, fair share of emissions. And I have some numbers here which I won't quote. But if you look at the value of that debt, I did a quick calculation. It's something like $46 trillion, right? Whereas the total debt, the financial debt of the developing countries is only 11 trillion, 1/4 that number. So climate justice says, okay, if you owe 46 million, erase the financial debt. And over a period of time in installments, you pay the remaining 36 trillion. Now, just to put it in context, there are $2 trillion a year being spent on armaments. So the money is there.
Right,
That's
sure.
the
The
point.
money is there, but you're talking about trillions. You'd be, as Samantha said, you'd be lucky to get millions or even billions. But Ruan, your response, I mean, the question is, if funds do come through loss and damage to Sri Lanka, you as a presidential advisor, would you say that there'll be accountability?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely correct. I think transparency is needed when it comes to getting the funds and distributing the funds. There's always an issue when it comes to developing nations. It's not only in Sri Lanka, I think, even some of the developed nations, the corruption level is there. But there has to, I think when it comes to loss and damage, there needs to be a proper system, data management system. So if the data is there, then the loss and damage can actually give, the fund can actually give the amount according to that data, and then we can make sure that the money goes into the people that are needed, in need of the funds. And there has to be a transparent system as well, so that, the developed nations, they are sending their taxpayers' money, and they need to know that their money is well spent. So it is up to us to make sure that they feel good about themselves as well, and then show that there is not going to be any corruption here, and everything should be transparent.
All right. Natasha, what do you think about what you've heard the panel say?
Well, I mean, given the historic reported misappropriation of funds in not just in Sri Lanka but across the developing world, I really do wonder if this fund will bring equity and will bring justice to those who are most vulnerable. We think about the most poor communities across the country, across the north and the east, who are underrepresented in politics and don't have as much political capital as those who live in Colombo, for example. So I am not sure, first of all, like the honorable guests have mentioned, getting this funding is going to be very, very difficult, and it would be incredibly important. But I do wonder how much of this will reach the people we...
All right. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Natasha. Okay, I'm going to take a couple of questions together now. They're slightly related. Let's go to you first, Tuan Jamion.
My question is, producing vegetables and fruits has been on the priority list of our Honorable President. And since 6 months, there is no progress actually in this field.
Rohan Kure, your question, please.
Thank you. My question is, climate is a science. So are we really using science, including disruptive technologies, to combat climate change? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Professor Munasinghe, why don't you kick off on the question about the allocation of land for food production, because obviously there's a lot of food insecurity in the country at the moment.
Right. It reinforces the point I started with, that sustainable development and climate solutions should be integrated. It's very clear that we go for win-win solutions. So if I don't know the specific situation in Sri Lanka because I'm not a policymaker, but anything to do with growing more biomass, and if you can feed people at the same time, this is clearly win-win because it will also fix carbon from the atmosphere. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Those are the kinds of solutions we need, and I hope the government will push it. And also remember, climate is only one of 17 sustainable development goals. So you have agriculture, energy, all of those. We have to integrate all of those aspects.
Fine.
You want me to answer the question on technology as well?
Very quickly on that one,
okay. Very quickly, I think one of the areas is digital technology. We do a lot of work, I do, my current research is on data science and data analytics. And there's a lot that can be done in the urban sphere, in the rural sphere, in fisheries and everything, using even simple things like cell phones that are everyday, as well as advanced analytical techniques with artificial intelligence and so on, which can greatly reduce the burden on the environment because it reduces resource use but makes people more efficient.
All right, thank you. Ruan, how would you answer the two questions on land allocation for food production and also climate smart agriculture, use of technology, mobile phones to know what prices are and also to give information that's useful for farmers and all the rest of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the president has also made it a priority for, he knows exactly the food insecurity which is in Sri Lanka at the moment. The land allocation has happened. I think the problem is the coordination between certain ministries and certain agencies, and that gets muddled up, and where, people who really want to come and, do their, to get their food growing and everything, they find it very hard to get land allocated to do that. This is one of the problems that we've been facing. But I know that the three forces have been put to start growing, food and everything in certain government lands that have not been used for so long. But I think and I know that when it comes to Colombo, the Colombo Municipal Council has been using some of their land for food production as well. But unfortunately, there's been little hiccups here and there, in which hopefully we can tweak it and get things moving along as soon as possible.
Okay, Hemantha?
I think we have a huge problem with this policy differences, because the conservation policies and agriculture policies, they are not matching each other. And we see each and every day our struggle has become fighting against the forest destruction. There are many, many examples I can bring, and there are court cases also. But there are a lot of...
But just explain that. Deforestation because people want to take the land for agricultural purposes.
Exactly.
And who's doing that, Hemantha?
These are the politically supported people in many areas, and sometimes they are big people going out from outside of those areas, and they are destroying hundreds of acres for maize cultivation. And so
but it's a scandal, isn't it, really?
It is, because the agriculture ministry is giving these lands, and we have a problem with the agriculture minister and the minister of forest and wildlife conservation are both same minister. So and they have to balance this situation. So therefore, and the giving away some of the forest areas and then trying to protect
profit,
some
for
other
personal
areas.
profits and so on. Before you carry on, just Hemantha, Ruan, do you want to respond to Hemantha and perhaps reassure him, because he doesn't look like he's really buying your arguments?
There is a problem where people are cutting down forests and going and putting up maize, like what Hemantha said. But I think what the president
But shouldn't that be stopped?
It has to be stopped. And one way that the president is wanting to come in to stop it is he's bringing an Environment Act into Parliament. He's bringing a Climate Change Act, and as well as a Forestry Act. So that will give more powers to stop people from going in and cutting down trees and basically clearing our forests.
Okay, Hemantha, and on the use of technology, I mean, there are all sorts of potential.
There are a lot of technologies we can use. At the same time, we have to see there are some false solutions are coming. For example, putting fertilizer into the ocean and trying to absorb all these carbon dioxide, or spraying chemicals into the atmosphere and make the clouds whiter. And these kind of bad technologies also come. These are the technologies that mostly we hear at the international COPs, because and that is how the big major corporations can continue to make the emissions, the rich countries continue to make the emission, but at the same time they say, okay, we have this technology to combat all these climate issues, and which as the civil society we are not buying that kind of argument.
Got a question here on social media for Amjad Asmir, who says, to meet the climate targets set by Sri Lanka's nationally determined contributions, NDCs, what are some of the concrete actions that the government of Sri Lanka has taken, is taking, or plans to take in 2023 to engage with the private sector on climate? So the role of the private sector is very important, isn't it, in this? I mean, just take tourism, for instance. You need sustainable tourism, one of the bedrocks of your economy here. Who wants to quickly answer that? What about you, Ruan?
No, absolutely. We are engaging with the private sector as well, and it is absolutely essential that we do, because when we do engage with the private sector, they bring in innovation, they bring in technology, and of course they are more efficient than working with the government. But it is essential, and the government has been working with the private sector very closely. And one way is also to bring in investments,
Right.
as well as to protect the environment through these investments.
Professor Munasinghe, I mean, perhaps this issue of sustainable tourism, private sector's involved in that. A lot of people depend on tourism for their livelihood here in Sri Lanka. You want to say to everybody, come and visit the country. But this issue of engaging with the private sector is critical.
Yes, the question is the private sector part of the problem or is it part of the solution? I like to believe the second, that we have to work towards it because the private sector is very big and you cannot exclude them. So some of them are good and some of them are not. So you have to work with those who are good. And just to give you an example, taking off on my thing of military expenditures, $2 trillion. Now that is the bad private sector, which is making huge profits on armaments, but they are the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. Nobody challenges the military in any country saying your greenhouse gas emissions are high, reduce it.
All right.
But they will go after the small person.
Thank you. And Hemantha, do you want a quick response on the private sector? Very quickly.
We say rules for business, rights for people. We see, as Professor already mentioned, that so we see that the private sector is a problem because they are not really willing to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but at the same time, without them joining this, so we cannot resolve this issue. Of course, Sri Lankan private sector, I think there are very few big industries. I think they have been trying to do something, but there should be a huge master plan in this country to bring all these people, because many of the smaller companies, they don't know what to do and how to reduce their emissions, their carbon footprint. I think we need a solution. We recently had a meeting and they say this is the first time we are listening to this language. You know, I think we have a fundamental issue about bringing everybody on board. It's not only the local. It's
bring everybody on board. Sorry
Exactly.
to cut you there, but we're running out of time. I want to go to our final question. Hafsa Muheed, your question, please.
Young people have been at the forefront of climate advocacy, yet the absence of young people in decision-making roles is clearly visible. What are some things you have done to bridge this gap? Climate diplomacy is critical in ensuring equitable and collaborative climate action. How can Sri Lanka or South Asia get started on this?
All right. Very quickly, gentlemen, final points. Professor Munasinghe.
Okay, I fully agree. This is the world that we are inheriting, which we have created, is not very sustainable, and it's up to the young to use the modern technologies and so on to solve it. So they must be given a seat. I'll make a very quick point. There is a report I prepared in 2019 as chair of the Presidential Expert Commission, which is called Sustainable Sri Lanka 2030 Vision. And I made a point out of 15 chapters. One is called The Voice of the Youth. And there's a very big chapter on what young people feel and what they can do. So I support you fully.
Okay, thank you. Ruwan and Wijo Waradena, Presidential Advisor.
Well, actually, when it comes to climate change, I think the youth are the ones who are leading it. I know that when it comes to the government, the Ministry of Environment has been working with Slycan Trust to basically build capacity amongst our youth when it comes to climate change issues. And I fully agree. I think the youth have to be more engaged for climate change decision making. And I think from what I know is that we have sent our delegation of youth to COP27. We have sent our delegation to COI 27. And, you know, we want to engage the youth more. And there is, of course, we are also hoping to establish the Climate Change University in Sri Lanka, the international university, that will help build capacity as well as do research for climate.
Thank you. That would be a first, wouldn't it, in the whole world? Okay. And Hemantha, final point.
Yeah, I really want to support the idea about bringing youth into this decision making. It's not just, we know people in Sri Lanka and elsewhere, and like the Fridays for Future, many of them are doing a lot of demonstrations against all these bad guys in the climate negotiations. But bringing them to the table and give them a seat and listening to them is vital if you want to resolve this issue. Because in this discussion, we are talking about intergenerational equity, because the current generation, we are not supposed to destroy everything and die and then give a very dirty, polluted world for our future generation. That's what we are trying to do, but the youth should stand up and fight for this justice, otherwise you won't get that chance. I think I really want to support all the young people to come forward and fight.
Thank you so much. That's all from this edition of Global Questions on how Sri Lanka is coping with the devastating consequences of climate change. I hope we've brought you some insights into this very pressing subject. Remember, we are the programme that brings you the trend lines behind the headlines. Thank you to my panel and to my audience here in Colombo, and to you too, wherever you're watching or listening to this programme. From me, Zainab Badawi, and the rest of the Global Questions team, until the next time, goodbye. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.